Hello!
Hello, everybody. Welcome to this new project that we're going to call Underqualified.
We said the world needs another podcast right
Yep.
now.
So, congratulations, you guys get to listen to us talk about things that we're only a little bit qualified to talk about.
Absolutely no expertise of any kind, really.
So, it's things that we think are interesting and that we've encountered at some point in our lifetime and that we would like to talk about, but we are by no means experts in.
No.
And so, we're just going to go for it.
And we welcome, if when we build an audience in this, if
Yes.
people ever listen to this, then we welcome expert feedback, or if we get anything wrong, please let us know. But yeah, this is all sort of just offhanded research that we've done in the last. I have done minutes of reading on my topic for today.
Absolutely.
So
there are three basic ground rules that we are going to adhere to for as long as we can. The first is that, to the best of our knowledge, we are only going to say things that are true. We can't promise that, but we are going to attempt to only say things that we are aware to be factual. The second, when we invariably break the first rule, because that's going to happen, you, whoever you are who is watching or listening to this, have to tell us what it is that we got wrong and what the correct thing is, because the whole point...
Tell us nicely.
That's rule number 3, is please be nice.
Sorry, I'm getting
because we're doing our best.
Yeah, I'm getting ahead of myself there.
Yep. So obviously, it's called Underqualified for a reason. We're talking about things that we're interested in, but we don't necessarily know a whole lot about. So if you know more than we do, please share that with us, but do it in a way that doesn't make us sad. So, this is going to be really free form. We've got 2 topics today. I'm going to be talking about a brief history and some basic concepts behind vaccinations. I guess we should say who we are.
Yeah, we
I'm
should
Nicholas.
Introduce ourselves.
This is my brother Benjamin.
Yeah, that's me. I'm Benjamin Johnson. If anybody doesn't know us personally that ever listens to to this podcast, I am a second-year college student at the University of North Texas, studying music education. I'm going to be a high school, or maybe not high school, a public school music teacher at some point in my life.
That's the plan.
That's plan A right now. I'm originally from Denver, Colorado, where we are now.
Yes. Welcome to our basement. This is our home.
Our professional recording studio, you mean.
Absolutely.
Yep.
I am in my first year of pharmacy school, so I'm not necessarily going to be leaning towards medical topics a lot, but that is stuff that I edge towards being qualified to talk about. I definitely am not, but I'm closer with those than a lot of things. And I don't really know. Maybe I want to work in a retail pharmacy. Maybe I want to do research. We'll see. But I've got a whole 3.5 years to figure that out. So we'll get there when we get there.
So we are two young men with no platform, no experience of any kind.
Absolutely.
And we are here to talk to you. So
welcome. We're so glad you're here.
We're excited.
And what are you talking about?
And I, to tie in with the vaccines, I'm going to be talking generally about conspiracy theories, not diving into any particular one, but talking about why they happen, why people believe in them, what makes them potentially challenging or dangerous, etc., etc.
And because it's what everybody's talking about, I am going to touch briefly on what makes the coronavirus vaccines that we've been seeing in the news different, and what makes them not different at all from what we've already been experiencing. So I'm going to start things off with a man by the name of Edward Jenner, who, if you have ever taken a high school or college level biology, microbiology, any sort of class that deals with cells and microbes, you have probably heard of this man. He lived from 1749 to 1823, and he is generally credited as the, quote, father of immunology. And he is the one who created the smallpox vaccine, which is generally considered to be the first formulated vaccine in medical history that we are aware of. There is evidence of things that might qualify as immunizations going back as far as the year 1000 in China. But Edward Jenner is often given the credit for the real breakthrough understanding. And the story, as it goes, is that he observed that the milkmaids who delivered milk in his village didn't get smallpox. And anecdotally, it's unclear how much of this is entirely true, but anecdotally realized that what they always got, well, not always, but more often than not got, was cowpox, which is a substantially less serious and entirely recoverable form of bacteria or exposure similar to smallpox. And so these milkmaids would get cowpox, they would recover, and then they wouldn't be able to get smallpox. And it's unclear to me how he made such a massive, it seems like a massive leap to me to say, well, you know what? They don't get cowpox, so that'll probably work for smallpox too. If I was working in a lab, that is not a very good hypothesis.
That's not the standard practice.
No, that's not a great starting point.
Now back to my hunch.
Exactly. And the story continues that he vaccinated, I believe it was like the son of his gardener or something like that, which again, ethical considerations had not even begun to enter the picture. And so that kind of thing flew in the 1750s. I guess 1770s or so.
Just give you a quick poke there.
Yeah. And so that is part of where the word vaccine actually comes from, the derivation of that word, because I believe, I want to say it's the Greek word for cow. Word for cow. I don't know how to say that. Maybe it's Latin.
Ayulada.
That doesn't seem right. Vaca. Okay,
Oh,
it's
okay.
Latin. Take it back. The Latin word for cow is vaca, and because the first vaccine was given because of this cow-based illness, the name is stuck, even though cows have not had anything to do with vaccine in the last 200 and some odd years or so.
Right.
And so things progressed from that point, and I'm going to skip that 200 some odd years of science to jump to where we are today, which is that a lot of vaccines are grown in eggs, which is why if you have an egg allergy, you can be excluded from some vaccines. I know that the flu vaccine is very frequently grown in eggs, I believe. And so the world of vaccines has really ballooned from that point, and all vaccines are by no means created equal. And so you have several branches of what's called, you can have live attenuated, toxoid, whole particle, various different classes of vaccines, and they all have different effectiveness, and they all work in slightly different ways. The toxoid vaccine is one of the most interesting to me. That would be your DTaP and your Tdap. So that stands for diphtheria, tetanus, and pertussis. Pertussis is known by the common name of whooping cough, which can be a really serious and just really scary and really sad infection of infants, for those of you who do not know. It is a fear of very many of parents around the world that is very well controlled by that vaccination, and is part of why there's so much evidence behind why vaccinations are so important. But the thing that makes all of those diseases similar is that they all produce toxins as part of their pathophysiology. And so the way that they make you sick is they enter your body, they latch on, and they begin to replicate, and they produce these toxins. And they all do extremely different things. Tetanus makes your entire body rigid. It makes all of your muscles forcibly contract to the point that you can't release them, which is why it used to be called lockjaw. If you're reading any historical or historical fiction novels and you hear about lockjaw, that's a tetanus infection, because often the first thing to go is your jaw. It's a horrible disease. Most of the people who died of tetanus died from aspirating their own vomit.
Nice.
Yes.
That sounds awful.
It causes a forcible and irreversible contraction of all skeletal muscles, which is why your jaw would lock up. And as your abdominal muscles contract, it forces the contents of your stomach back up your throat. And a lot of those patients were aspirated. So again, horrible things that you do not want to experience. They're taken care of by vaccines. And what the toxoid vaccines do is they take a bunch of these different toxins, and deactivate them entirely. So that is, toxoid vaccine is a word that can scare a lot of people that are concerned about vaccines for good reason. Sounds toxic, why would I want to be putting toxic chemicals in my body? But the toxoid vaccine is a completely inactivated form of the toxins of those three illnesses. And it works well because your body will eventually clear all of those toxins and will have an immune response. The issue with the infection is it just takes too long. And so by the time your body begins to stimulate an immune response and begins to clear those toxins, you've had tetanus for 2 to 3 weeks, which, unless you have received medical care and they can get, an air tube going, you're going to have a problem.
Right.
This happens over the course of 2 weeks internally. You have very few symptoms, and it lasts for, I believe the Tdap is 10 years. That is an issue. That is a drawback of the toxoid vaccines, is that they don't have the longevity of some of the whole particle vaccines. But the thing that fascinates me about those is that there is no bacteria or any form of the bacteria in those vaccinations. So often what we think of is that you're getting a shot of whatever it is that they're trying to immunize you against, and then you can build up an immune response to it. And that's really not the case with toxoid vaccines. You're getting the byproduct of that infection that has been deactivated so that it doesn't harm you. There really isn't, as far as I'm aware of, any of the actual bacteria in the vaccination itself.
Right. And that's how allergy shots work as well, right? It's a very small amount of whatever you're allergic to.
Yes.
So, but can you talk a little bit about how like a long-term vaccine is different than that? I know this is not in the field of research, so I'm just throwing this at you.
I personally do not know. I would assume that the allergy shots are really just our vaccinations. We just don't happen to call them that.
Okay.
And part of that is because the allergy shots are such small doses, and you do them repeatedly, and the immunization builds sort of as you go.
Right.
We both had allergy shots as kids. For those of you who have not had them, if your allergies are more serious, like mine were, I got a shot in each arm every day for 5 years.
5 years probably. Yeah. And that's a different sort of intent as well. I'm totally uneducated about this entire topic, but with allergy shots, you're getting the body to not attack itself, right? That's what happens with allergies.
Right.
Whereas when we're talking about a tetanus immunization, or when we're talking about coronavirus, that's something that's outside of the body that we're trying to teach the body how to respond to. And so I guess I would imagine that's a different sort of challenge as you're designing immunization to have that different sort of approach.
Allergy shots are a weird circumstance that would be kind of interesting to talk about on their own, because allergies in and of themselves are fairly new, and there has been a suggestion that they're a result of an excessively clean environment, which is what is known as the clean theory. It makes sense on paper. On the other hand, I have had several microbiology professors who say that the clean theory is junk, and that there needs to be a lot more discussion about what has caused allergies. But the clean theory says that because the world that we live in has been so sterilized by all of our cleaning products, our hand sanitizers, our baby wipes, what have you, that our immune system has kind of run out of things to pull the trigger on. And so as your immune system is developing before you're born and after you're born, it just sort of picks things that it doesn't like. It could be pollen, it could be all sorts of different foods, pet dander, all of these things that loosely resemble, I would assume that they loosely resemble antigens of actual infections.
Right.
That would make the most sense to me. And the body is like, that works too. And then whenever you get exposed to them, your immune system fires off as if you have just, experienced a massive body infection.
Right. Another thing tying into that same theory that I can vaguely remember talking about in high school biology was the correlation between an increase in the percentage of people with allergies and an increase in the number of babies that are delivered by C-section. Which is, it's the same sort of idea, right? Because you're exposed to bacteria as when the baby's being born, traveling through the birth canal.
Yes, I have heard
you're
this.
exposed to bacteria, and everything is sort of blown up in its impact and importance when it's happening super early in life, right? Yeah. And so the idea is that if you're not getting that initial exposure as you're coming out into the world, that might put a deficit in your microbiome from the moment that you are born. But again, that's just a concept that I can remember talking about. Yeah. I don't know any of the data offhandedly for that statistical correlation. But
I read something in my pathogenic microbiology class my senior year in college that is the topic, again, of a completely different discussion that was so frustrating to me. And it said that in all likelihood, we will never know what the quote-unquote appropriate human microbiome is. Because it was changed so drastically by the time that we even realized that it existed, which is within the last century.
Right.
Because of the foods that we have eaten, and the way that we have lived our lives sort of in contrast to the rest of the natural world, which, you can take whatever opinion about that you want, has altered our gut microbiome to the point that we will never know what it was originally. And as someone who really loves science, that drove me nuts.
You don't like not knowing.
No, I don't like not knowing. I want to know things. Yeah. But to kind of to recenter ourselves on vaccines here, the general concept is that you receive a very, 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 very small dose of either a part of, a deactivated version of, or the deactivated toxins of a virus or a bacteria. And that comes in part and parcel with what is known as an adjuvant, which is a word that a lot of people struggle with, and which is just a fancy term for irritant. And so often what it is it's, again, an extremely infinitesimal dose of aluminum, which is something that anti-vaxxers like to get on their stump about, is that you're receiving aluminum, which is a carcinogen, which is true. It is true that aluminum is a carcinogen, but numerous studies, I don't have one in front of me, but I could pull one up, have said that aluminum from the shot clears your system almost by the next time that you go and to use the restroom. And the dose that you receive from a single vaccine is less than the dose of aluminum that you would get from putting on aluminum containing antiperspirants on a daily basis. And even those have not been shown to have a statistically relevant link to cancer development. And so, in my mind, if you're putting on more than that in your antiperspirant deodorant daily and you don't get cancer, getting a shot once every 10 years is probably not going to cause cancer.
Well, and in conjunction with that point, you've sort of jokingly in the past made the comment that just sort of everything gives you cancer. And so
yes,
there are lots of things that we can talk about that are carcinogenic, can be sort of statistically tied to an increased risk of cancer. But there's a certain point as you're, and I'm not saying, don't be concerned about these things. Don't be concerned about what you're injecting into your body. I'm not like a Lysol to get rid of coronavirus type of thing at all. I'm just saying that at a certain point, if you're avoiding everything that could potentially one day give you cancer, well, it's just not practical, right? It's not.
I don't know if it can even be done.
Yeah.
There was a comedian who I can't credit them because I don't know who it is off the top of my head, and I apologize. This is not my joke. Said that everything in the world gives you cancer, so you may as well pick something fun.
Right.
There you go. Exposure to anything and everything at certain levels can become carcinogenic, which, of course, that's not entirely true. But it sure does seem like
we do endorse healthy living and good choices and not avoiding things that are potentially carcinogenic or, whatever. Don't do anything stupid because of this conversation.
No. But the adjuvant might actually be the most important part of the vaccine, even more so than what you are actually being exposed to in the vaccine, because most doses are so small that your body doesn't react to it. Because it is inactivated, it isn't replicating, it isn't, well, some of them are replicating, but that's a more specific conversation. The dose that you're getting is so small that your body doesn't even know that it's happening if you don't have an adjuvant in there. The adjuvant is what causes the swelling and irritation and soreness from when you get the vaccine. You're welcome. But what it does is, because it creates that response, it gets the immune cells of the body to congregate and circulate in that area where you have received the vaccination. So that's really important, because while they're there, they pick up on that teeny tiny little dose of the vaccine, whatever vaccine that you've been given. They consume it, in all likelihood, the immune cells do, and then in most cases, again, I'm speaking in broad terms because I'm not going to make you all listen to descriptions of every single class of vaccinations, the immune cells will then begin to express markers that those particles that they have taken in would have had on them. So stuff that makes the flu look like the flu to your body is presented on the outside when you get the vaccination. Your cells take it in, they absorb it, they express those things, so that if you do encounter the flu in your day-to-day life, your immune cells immediately say, wait a minute, that matches with what I've got right here. And then they can react almost instantaneously, as opposed to having to go through that consumption and development process, which can take anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks, depending on what the particle is. And so, depending on the vaccine, that can be a one-time thing. That can be something that fades over time, which is why you have to get boosters for numerous vaccinations. I can think of the tetanus one and the meningitis one off the top of my head. That, again, because it's a toxin, it's not the whole particle, your body doesn't respond as strongly as it would to something that is a live attenuated vaccine, and so you have to get those boosters. But that is the general concept, and that's why they work so well, because you're being exposed to such a teeny tiny portion of these really serious illnesses that it does absolutely nothing to you other than giving your body a chance to absorb the material not become immune in most cases, but give your body the chance to fight those things off before it becomes an infection, which is why they're so important. And why anti-vaxxers are so frustrating.
For sure.
Which is the tie-in to the conspiracy theory
segue
portion of
conspiracy
the discussion.
Theories. Cool. All right, yeah, let's jump into that. So that was great. Thanks, Nicholas.
Yeah.
Touching on, let's see, we got cancer, vaccinations, allergies, all that stuff, just from conversation about vaccines. So that's great. There's a little bit. It's interesting doing research on conspiracy theories because I didn't want to dive into a bunch of different conspiracy theories and run the risk of converting myself to some ridiculous thing by going down the rabbit hole. I just wanted to talk about, why do people believe in these? How do they get traction? And how do they impact sort of the mainstream, I guess. And actually,
millions of people in some cases.
Exactly, yeah. And a lot of these conspiracy theories are frighteningly close to mainstream. And we'll sort of get into that later. But just to start out with, the dictionary definition, Merriam-Webster, of a conspiracy theory is a theory that explains an event or set of circumstances as the result of a secret plot by usually powerful conspirators. So that's actually a little bit more broad of a definition than I might have thought at first, which is, when we talk about conspiracy theories, it's not, one group that we can label as conspiracy theorists, because that sort of definition, just the idea that somebody's trying to pull something over on you, well, you can apply that to any different number of historical events or contexts in our day-to-day life, which is why these sort of ideas that can take hold are so various, multifaceted, etc. And another distinction that I thought was interesting was the difference between a conspiracy theory and just a false belief.
Okay.
And so, because they're different things.
Straight up being incorrect. Yeah.
So because we all have false beliefs, right?
Yeah.
For example, I'm looking at this Psychology Today article. And so the example that they use is if you think that Sydney is the capital of Australia, which I did until reading this article.
Is it Melbourne?
No, it's Canberra.
Canberra, dang it.
So, right, but as soon as I tell you that, you say, oh, okay, well, Canberra is the capital of Australia. And that's the distinction between...
It's over.
Right, when I'm presented with facts, when this hole in my knowledge is filled by a more informed source, I say, okay, I now accept that the capital of Australia is in fact Canberra and not Sydney. And so it's actually that the ability to readily change your mind and adapt to take in new information, I guess, that distinguishes that from a conspiracy theory. Because to believe in a conspiracy theory, by definition, you have to be sort of emotionally invested in the conspiracy theory, right? You have to have a vested interest in the conspiracy theory being accurate. Which is like I'm not personally impacted by having to acknowledge that I didn't know what the capital of Australia was. It's kind of sad for me, but it doesn't change my life to say, okay, now I know what the capital of Australia is. Whereas for, let's talk about some conspiracy theories. Let's say anti-vaxxers or, the birther theory with President Obama, that he was not an American citizen, or the QAnon conspiracy, to fall in line with that line of thinking, there has to be at the onset of that a deep dive into research, because inherently conspiracy theories are a departure from the mainstream, and in order to make that departure, there's sort of an action where you're exposed to this idea and you get more and more into it, and then you go down the rabbit hole and you end up thinking that something that is completely not based in fact is true. And so that's a distinction between false beliefs and conspiracy theories. I didn't do any research on Australia. Coming back to the same point, I didn't have any vested interest in that being true. It's just sort of, something that I didn't know and can be corrected on. Whereas with conspiracy theories, it's you are putting in effort to learn about a certain topic. It's just none of it's true. And so, well, let's talk about how you can get sucked into believing some of these ideas that are not in any way based in fact. And so, according to this same Psychology Today article, there's sort of 3 driving factors that can lead someone to believe in a conspiracy theory on a psychological level. And none of those are an appeal to logic, which is why it's so hard to argue facts with somebody who believes in conspiracy theory, because the driving areas of believing in a conspiracy theory are a desire for understanding and certainty, a desire for control and security, and a desire to maintain a positive self-image. So what does believing in a conspiracy theory sort of accomplish for you? You have this idea that you're on the inside of something, that you know something that other people don't, or in fact, people are having something pulled over on them, and you're the only one that knows and can effectively combat that because you're at this higher level of knowledge. So inherently, that's elevating yourself to a different level of status.
Right, you're above them because you're in the in-group.
Right, exactly. And naturally, let's talk about that first one, understanding and the desire for understanding and certainty. Just naturally, we want to have explanations for events. That's sort of the whole, that's the basis behind religion, philosophy, and also science. Certainly is like just being able to explain the world around us, and we constantly sort of seek these explanations out. But you can apply that thing, or apply that concept to, I guess, things that are not explained scientifically. Like the example that this article uses: why does it rain the day I want to go out? Like there's not a scientific justification for that.
Just kind of feel that way.
Yeah, it's just you're like, well, I want explanation for this. So that's a very natural human emotion. And so I guess conspiracy theories certainly appeal to that because sometimes our scientific, truthful explanations for why things work the way that they do are not satisfying on the one hand.
There's a lot of stuff we don't know yet.
Right, because there are these gaps in knowledge. And also, the great explanations that you just gave about vaccines are wonderful, and you delivered it very well, but is every listener going to understand what you're talking about when you're talking about adjudicated
adjuvants?
Yeah. See, I don't even know. And so that might lead you to turn elsewhere and say, oh, well, they're injecting us with arsenic and aluminum, and it's poison. And that's,
you hear the word that you do know, and you latch onto it, and you just sort of filter out the stuff that you don't understand.
Right. And that point about aluminum, it is true that is in vaccines, but there's, an explanation for it, that it's in such a small dosage that doesn't, not going to impact your health in a negative way. Right. But if you don't look for that explanation and you just focus on the fact that there is aluminum in vaccines, it's easy to take that and run with it and have this certainty in understanding that, just using both those words, certainty and understanding, that there's aluminum in vaccines, and you latch onto that idea instead.
I think there's a certain lack of understanding of the metric system involved in that as well, because I think that dose of aluminum is on the microliters, which if any of you have ever used a microliter pipette, you know what I'm about to talk about, which is that microliters are like, you could get like probably a dozen microliters to fit on the width of your pinky nail.
Oh my gosh.
So we're talking about absolutely incomprehensibly small
doses.
Right.
But that's, again, you don't know that.
Exactly.
You see that it's there and it's a concern.
Mm-hmm. And so moving on to this second point, so the desire for control and security. So this gets into a little bit about the idea of having a vested interest in the conspiracy theory being accurate. I think the most accessible example of this is talking about climate change and global warming. It is not a happy reality talking about some of these projections for how our climate is changing, and the idea of the seas or the ocean level rising by 10 feet and the percentage of the population that would impact, and some of these other sort of just difficult realities that are implied by climate change. It's not a nice thing to be talking about what the world's going to look like 50 years from now. And the two reactions, I suppose, are to say, well, oh my gosh, we need to do something about this, and then you become sort of a climate activist in one way or another. Or to say, well, it's just not true. And the luxury in saying, oh, it's just not true is if I say that, I don't have to change my lifestyle in any way. I'm comfortable with how I'm living my life now. And so if I say, well, that's just not true, then I don't have to adjust my routine, my lifestyle in any way. And certainly, there are people involved in industries that contribute disproportionately to climate change. And so then they would have an even more vested economic interest in disbelief in climate change, because that's tied to their livelihood. So that's what we talk about with, you have some part of yourself invested in believing in something that is completely not supported by facts. And so you rely on the emotion of wanting to be safe, wanting to be economically stable, and that can point you towards believing in this conspiracy theory. It doesn't hurt that we have pundits and politicians who will argue that climate change is a hoax, and so if you're hearing that from anybody and you have a vested interest in that being true,
especially an authority figure,
certainly, yeah, for sure, you're much more likely to believe that would be the case. And the last one, we've sort of touched on it already, is just this desire to maintain a positive self-image. And so there's research tying belief in conspiracies to social marginalization. So groups that feel powerless, groups that have difficulty engaging with sort of society as a whole, are much more likely, statistically speaking, to believe in conspiracy theories.
Who may have actually had something pulled over on them.
Sure, yeah.
In certain cases, I mean.
Certainly, yeah. That's absolutely true. And so it's a natural human emotion sort of gone wrong, because we all have a desire to think that we're good people and to think that we are special, or at least competent, and able to engage in society in a positive way. And the sense of community is just, it's a human necessity, to feel like you belong somewhere. And that is one thing that you can say about conspiracy theory communities, is you are a part of something.
Yeah.
You get sucked in and you are there. And so there's a sort of camaraderie built into believing in conspiracy theories that is appealing to people who don't have that naturally in their lives.
Well, I would think, without having done the psychological, making an experiment myself, I would think that would be sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy, because as soon as you proclaim to other individuals that you believe in something that is not accepted widely by the the scientific or the literary or whatever community it is that you're flying in the face of, the people that you are telling are often going to mock you for that. And so that will just force you even deeper into the group, because they accept you and no one else does.
Right.
So once it gets you, you sort of just spiral further into it, because you very rarely do we reach in and say, well, let's actually talk about that.
Right.
We just say, you're an idiot.
Exactly, yeah. And that's certainly an obstacle to discourse on vaccinations, because we have all of the evidence and all of the angles that are necessary to sort of diffuse all of the concerns levied by the anti-vax, if you want to call it a movement, I guess.
I do have Andrew Wakefield pulled up here on Wikipedia, so we can sort of loop back to that. He's the guy who published the paper that said that vaccines cause autism.
Oh, yeah.
Which is a whole big can of worms.
Right. Yeah.
Kind of launched that conspiracy theory in and of itself.
Right. I was going to go somewhere.
No, I'm sorry.
That's okay. That's really good. So just, I guess, one final point generally that I'll make about conspiracy theories. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of hard data on this idea because it's just hard to have hard psychological data. And, you know, if you're researching people who believe in conspiracy theories, you know, getting them to participate in a well-designed experiment might be a little difficult bit of a challenge.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so, but this is just sort of an interesting statistical nugget, is that, so that idea that people believe in conspiracy theories out of a desire for security and safety, it's actually shown specifically with college students that when they're exposed to conspiracy theories, they show an increased sense of insecurity, sort of irrational insecurity.
Interesting.
And so this could support the conclusion that conspiracy theory belief is self-defeating. Like there's all of the emotional desire for safety and security and a sense of community is not actually provided or seen by people who believe in conspiracy theory. So if you're saying like I'll talk about sometimes with flat earthers, because, you know, what are the consequences of people thinking that the earth is flat? And so it's like, you know, knock yourself out. Think what you will. Whereas on climate change, vaccinations, QAnon, if we want to get into that, those are all dangerous. Like there are consequences of having a large body of people that believe in those things. Right. But on that point, it actually says, you know, there's still reason for concern with people who feel that way, because all of those things that have led them to believe in something that is not true, to seek community in falsehood, they're actually going to be worsened by the belief in that. So we can't just say, well, you're not really hurting anybody,
go nuts.
So go nuts, believe whatever you want to, as long as it's not impacting me and government decision. Because, you know, these are people that are vulnerable, and it's that vulnerability that leads them to take solace, take comfort in the wrong thing. And in doing that, they sort of dig themselves in a deeper hole. And so, you know, it's we can make fun and we can joke around about, you know, your crazy uncle who shows up to the family reunion talking about how the earth is flat. But with any sort of conspiracy theory, I guess, and then I'll be a little bit idealist here, but which is, you know, sort of in character for me. But the antidote is sort of is compassion. The
working with them.
Right. The antidote is not necessarily debating fact with them, because it's not an appeal to logic, but the idea of sort of meeting these people where they are, and, you know, trying to understand what has driven them to find themselves in this community, and then, you know, how do we go from there? How do we help them out of it? And I'm not sure that there's a formula for that right now. A difficult question. And I certainly don't have the answer to that. Even just, you know, from a purely political perspective, it's like, how do we talk to these people who have such different beliefs on like fundamental issues?
Right.
And so that's a conversation just in politics, and it's a conversation certainly with like the fringe conspiracy theories on either side of the political spectrum of, you know, how do we meet these people, and how do we bring them back into the fold, and how can we address those things that have led them to believe in ideas that are hateful?
Right.
How do we remove the circumstance that has led them down this path? So Could keep talking about this forever, but I think we're running low on time.
We are.
I'm going to touch really briefly on the man that I mentioned earlier, which is Andrew Wakefield, who I will boldly say might be the biggest pariah in modern medical history. One of the most, I'm not going to say hated, but disliked and hated,
pretty hated,
frankly, individuals who used to be a member of the medical community. So if you don't know this story, Andrew Wakefield used to be a researcher and a doctor. I say that because his medical license was stripped from him after what he did, who had a study that was published in The Lancet in 1998, according to this Wikipedia article. Sorry, high school teachers everywhere. That claimed that there was a link between the MMR vaccine, which stands for measles, mumps, and rubella, and causing autism in young children. If you don't understand the gravity of such an article being posted, The Lancet might be the foremost medical journal on the planet. So when this came out in 1998, this was huge. This is a big deal. What quickly began to happen is that people stopped getting vaccinated. And we have seen a decrease. I tried to say decline and decrease at the same time. A decrease in vaccine percentages in almost every country. The other thing that quickly happened is that other researchers came back and said this is crap, frankly. And The Lancet retracted the paper, and they said, do you want to stand on this data? And he said yes, and he lost his medical license within the next few years because of that. And
that's sort of, peer review functioning as it's supposed to.
Yeah.
Right?
They came out and they said, whoa, this is not right.
Right. But the after effects of that
are still sending ripples through the community. What came out is that he faked the whole thing. The data was not legitimate. He had tests that were unreliable, and this is a reach. This is stretching how much I remember from this discussion. I believe that he specifically found children who were already on the spectrum to use in this test. And again, that is a reach. I don't remember if that's true. I just seem to recall that is what occurred. If that is not true and you're listening, please tell me. But I seem to recall that was part of how he used fraudulent data. To tie into what Benjamin has been talking about, and the reason that this is such a problem, people still talk about this. This paper came out, it was retracted. He is still in the anti-vaxxer lecture circuit, if such a thing exists. He still goes around talking to people about his bunk research that everyone has ruled out, and it continues to convince people to not get vaccinations. And we have seen resurgences of measles,
mumps and rubella.
Shockingly, because people don't get the MMR as much as they should.
And on the other end of this thing, funding is still going to studies and research projects to disprove this idea that has been
many times over
thoroughly debunked. And I just was looking up, study from 2019, from last year, that was saying, there's no connection between the MMR vaccine and autism. And so, we're still. How long ago did you say the study was published? 98. So 22 years later.
Yeah.
We're still having to sort of combat this narrative with an overwhelming body of evidence that has still not been enough. I don't know why I said we. I'm not studying these things. Sorry, scientific community.
Immunologists are grinding it out, and it's Benjamin.
I do music. That's what I'll talk about at some point.
Well, we've got to go. I promised to talk about the COVID vaccine. We didn't get to it. That's okay. I might do an entirely different podcast about just the COVID vaccine. That's the third thing that I've said that I could talk about entirely in its own section. This is the first ever Underqualified podcast. We hope that you all have enjoyed it. If you're watching on YouTube, hello! If you are listening somewhere where you cannot see us, thank you so much for listening. We appreciate all of you for stopping by. We're going to try and do this every other week.
Maybe.
We'll see if that happens. He's in college. I'm in graduate school. We don't know how busy we're going to be. Maybe that's plenty. Maybe that's a lot. But we hope that you have enjoyed listening. Again, we did everything in our power to say only things that were true as far as we are aware of. Things that we got wrong, please tell us. We would like to know. This podcast is about exchanging information and continuing to fight against some of those issues that he was just talking about with conspiracies. So please share information with us if you have it and the sources with which you got it from. As always, be nice, take care, and thank you everybody so much for listening.
Thanks for hanging with us, guys. See you next time.